Holy fuck!
Oh my God! Oh my God! Chris, are you...
Don't touch it.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh no! Oh my God!
Our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you, good night, and God bless America.
Join Michael Voris in the Netherlands as he unravels the breakdown and restoration of Christian civilization. This event will take place in Nijmegen on November 15th and 16th. For more information, click on the link provided.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris. With this continual current in the church these days of there being no hell, or a more popular variation on that theme that is, well, there is a hell, but no humans are actually in it, or at least we can reasonably hope that, a certain deformed mindset is revealed. Supporters of such a position have failed to grasp the reality of fallen human nature in its completeness. There are actual, real people walking around who simply never give God a thought, not in any meaningful manner, that is, unless it is, of course, to blaspheme Him. It's not a question of God not extending His mercy to everyone. Of course He does. The problem with the "there's not really anybody in hell" position is that it doesn't take into account the very concrete circumstances of life. Every day, millions of people wake up and go to work in immoral professions where their day-to-day job entails objective sin and evil. The abortion industry springs to mind.
Kevin, what's caused the outbreak of fundamentalism, Islamic, Christian, Hindu, that we've seen in the last 20, 30 years or so?
Well, I'll give a simple answer, a short answer to a very complex question. But one thing that's often noticed by sociologists, that in a time of intense change, where it seems that the world is being turned upside down, there seems to be a natural tendency for some people to just go back and find the securities in a frame of reference that they know. And Rokic years ago said that fundamentalism or dogmatism is like a house of bricks, and they dread that if you take one brick away, their whole belief system will collapse. So in the face of all sorts of evidence about this or that, they can just shut off, not maliciously, but it's a way of coping with a time of great change. There are many other dimensions to that, which I think we'll be addressing later on, about symbolism and Bible and all those things.
Eugene, what have you thought in the last decade or so about the Islamic fundamentalism that we've seen? How has it changed your thinking about religion?
I studied Islam very closely when I was in Jerusalem. In fact, some of my friends thought I was becoming a Muslim. But they said, but beware of the Pakistanis. They're fanatical. The real Islam is what you learn from the Arabs. I felt as though I was listening to an Italian in Rome. But yes, I think it's true that the Quran really is a beautiful book, especially when you read in the Arabic. And it's and I can see how it's a wonderful support of people who follow that religion. But it's a case of taking texts out of context and giving them a meaning that they didn't have when they were in context. And I can't believe, for example, that a Muslim who each day would say, Bismillahi ar-Rahmani al-Rahimi, in the name of God, the compassionate, the benevolent, could then go ahead and do acts of terrorism, because the God that they invoke is the God of compassion. True Islam is a beautiful thing, but other interests come in. I mean, there's the desire to create a super caliphate across the Middle East, for example, to reproduce the glories of the past, when Islam was the civilization. I suppose there's thoughts like that, but I really don't know how a true Muslim could be a terrorist. When they have such riches of wisdom, in the religion.
David, the leading American Islamic scholar, Bernard Lewis, talked about the idea that what happened at September 11 was a reaction of a civilization that's actually in decline. It's a decline reaction, that this is a kind of an outburst of energy, but it's coming out of a sense of the almost overwhelming now sort of outpouring of Western civilization and consumerism and Hollywood and everything bearing down on Islamic culture.
Yeah, I think it's an important perspective. The psychoanalyst Alfred Adler coined a term in 1913 called the masculine protest. And it's a very fascinating thing to think about in terms of fundamentalism. As Kevin said, the outbreak of fundamentalism is partly to do, of course, it's a response to uncertainty. It's a knee-jerk reaction, in a sense, to the postmodern era and all the uncertainties. And to some extent, I sympathise with aspects of it, frankly, because our world is becoming so bland and so secular and so materialistic that in order to find a religious perspective, you really need to contact a source of passion in your inner self The problem with that passion is that it's uneducated and infantile and full of rage. But coming back to the masculine protest, I do think that this is the unfortunate expression of a whole civilization which is facing, in a sense, being sidelined by Western interests, and this, at the core of it, is rage. But unfortunately, it's a rage which is pretending to be religious. But I think we should, you know, in a sense, name it as it is. It's violent outrage, which the religious element is merely a superficial covering. It's not religion at all.
Peter, early in your book, you've got a let's leave Islam aside, and you speak more generally about fundamentalism in general, and you talk about it in terms of the battle between the closed society and the open society.
Yes, well, I'm a great fan of Karl Popper and his notion of the difference between the open society, which is one open to information exchanges and shifts in perception from other societies, as opposed to the closed society, which is just another term for a totalitarian or authoritarian state. You know, I think fundamentalism, in any of its guises, rather suits people who are authoritarian in personality or who embody David's masculine protest, and people who are very rigid and who need certainty.
Kevin, I think the idea of the open and the closed society leads you to the idea of tribalism versus cosmopolitanism. And, you know, arguably Islam is at base a tribal religion. It certainly started out as the religion of a particular Arabic clan that grew to swallow up the others, and its self-image is that it's constantly expanding. It's taking over the whole world, in a sense. The tribe is absorbing the whole world into it. That is the dynamic of Islam. Arguably, Christianity was at base a cosmopolitan religion, almost from the word go.
Yes, insofar as like the reign of God was a symbol that belonged to everybody. As you know, one of the problems has been when the church appropriated and said the reign of God is in the church, they lost the whole meaning of the reign of God, because Jesus went to his death for inclusion, that everybody was there. And that's why many of the hearers and heroines of the gospel, actually all the marginalised people, the first shall be last, the last shall be first. Jesus saying, I'm turning the world upside down, you've got a certain number of categories, and it's not like that at all. They're all in it. But then you had, you know, outside the church there's no salvation and all that stuff that came in. Once it became that, it lost the whole point, because the whole message of Jesus was about a new consciousness, a new time, which is termed a kingdom of God or reign of God. That's for everybody. And once the church loses that the reign of God is bigger than the institution, that bigger and embrace the world, it becomes another tribal group in another sort of way. But it was not meant to be that. It was not meant to be that at the beginning, but in the 4th century, as you know, was a turning point of the whole thing. Like, it was really sad in a way that in 386, the first time a Christian leadership group beheaded 6 members of this guy who was promoting a particular doctrine. The first time Christians beheaded another group of Christians for heresy, because during the 4th century, gradually, for political reasons, you had to have the right language, you have the right terms. And so you've got this development that became a big problem for political purposes. As you know, Nicaea was called, and gradually they kept saying that's the binding force of the empire. If we get it right, that people have to say the right things and get right. So this led to a whole problem of getting the right language and all that there, and that trapped in, unless people were very careful, the mystics and different like Icard and Hildegard and different people kept saying at another level, but they were a very small group who kept saying, but we've missed the point, you know, it's for everybody. It's no accident that the whole of the post-Vatican Church is very much founded, at least at one level, on the reign of God. And when I grew up as a Catholic, I hardly heard that at all. And during my doctorate, when I had two great professors who were both, they were Anglican ministers, but they were also Jungian background, that was a conversion thing to me. It suddenly was a dawning light that I'd missed the point in some ways of being Catholic, that it was really about a whole new vision, the reign of God, which was for everybody, including creation that comes into that. When we lose that, the danger is always tribalism.
I think most of you in your books, your various books, talk about the rejection at some level of tribalism, and hankering after, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, hankering after some kind of, whatever this new theology or this new religious vision is going to be, it's going to be a universal one.
Yeah. I think Christians started to lose it with Constantine and the...
Well, I mean, I'd say to you that Constantine, for all of the negativity associated with that, that's the great moment when Christianity actually does become...
I think it had an opportunity to become truly universal then, but it got lost. Right. And they started persecuting the mystics.
Yeah.
Sure, but it wouldn't have expanded really, would it? If it hadn't become grafted onto something like a major imperial political system, would it? That's the reality.
The Roman Empire would like the spokes of a wheel through which Christianity was disseminated, but I think the problems began to occur after that when all of the wonderful mystical concepts of Christ became fossilised into dogma, and people were persecuted for being dissident or mystic.
Let's go back to the tribal thing, though. What's at stake? What are you after? Why is it important to put the tribal aside and go for something universal?
I think it's absolutely essential because we've just seen fundamentalism in all of its guises is another expression of tribalism, and what we're seeking with a world that's connected by the internet and with Teilhard's notion of consciousness embracing humanity is a new form of universal consciousness and spirituality that's not confined by the old.
However, we need to watch a kind of false syncretism. You know, for example, I like what the Dalai Lama said, like, do I need to become a Buddhist? He said, no, like, I think it was a Christian, but find the heart of your revelation. Go to the depths and the core of your revelation. There have been many revelations, as we said earlier, of God, Aboriginal revelations and so on. But go to the heart of it and don't walk around the circumference of it because you'll be trapped there, you know. Otherwise, we get this vague sort of idea in the unification thing that everyone sort of finds a vague common thing. For example, I'm Catholic and I want to deepen my tradition, but not necessarily become a Buddhist or Hindu, with due respect, I hasten to add, to those religions. I want to say that because some of the language now about the universal themes seem to be an artificial sort of syncretism which bothers me. I'd like to have the tradition, but as long as the people know they go to the heart of their tradition, and that's where, as people like Raymond Panica and so on say, we have different, if you like, wells, but we drink from the same water. And lovely Sufi Hindu people say, we have different wells. Don't deny the different wells you have, but go down to the drinking of the same water and a sense of that.
What about Catholic fundamentalism? Because that was a big part of this video that we've just seen, but we haven't really touched on it.
Can I make 2 points about that? Firstly, I think it is one of the forces that is driving people out of the church because they can find nothing mystical or truly sacramental to partake in there. And on the other hand, again, it's perpetuating this centering on the magisterium as the source of all truth for the world and the Catholic Church universal, when in fact they've left totally out of they've left out the significance of people like, you mentioned the Jesuits, and so have you, David, people like Teilhard de Chardin, whose whole aim was to bring the world not just into a vague set of global interconnectedness and consciousness, but to a very real and sacramental experience of the mystical Christ at the centre of creation, and in which all human beings participate, and through which all human beings get to experience the mystical connection of themselves with all others and the sacredness of all beings, including Indigenous people. And I think part of our difficulty is linguistic. We have yet to find a language.
I'm very interested in this idea about the fear. I about a year or so ago, I went to the Gaudi Sagrada Familia chapel that Benedict XVI opened, I think in 2011 in Barcelona. You walk in and it's not clear what's being sacralised in the interior. You know, on the exterior, it's clear that it's the nativity and the crucifixion on one side, but you come inside and it's like being in a primeval forest, and people are staring up like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's like this purple light, and they're looking up at it could be that they're underwater, or it could be that they're staring out to interstellar space. It could be any of these things. And I wrote that if the toe of a Tyrannosaurus Rex were in a glass reliquary on the altar, it wouldn't be out of place. But what happened after they opened that building is that they read that as well as anybody else did, and they moved very, very quickly to kind of rescue the building and make Gaudi this kind of patron saint of this conservative 19th century, which he certainly had been.
Gaudi was anything but that.
Yeah, but what I felt was he had this beautiful vision of a building that grew organically out of the plants of the region, and it was all organically in there, and it had to be killed.
And did you know that it took so long to build this enormous cathedral? Because its geometry was non-Euclidean and conducive to awakening within its space a sense of mystical connection with the whole cosmos, let alone with humankind, or inclusive of Indigenous people. That's what people found so shocking about it. If one walks into, say, Chartres or Notre Dame, one experiences classical, glorious, soaring medieval architecture, but not this non-Euclidean geometry and experience that Gaudi provides. An inner space, it's not just geometrical.
Final question on fundamentalism, and that is, you know, in a sense, I think this is a question in the video, has the war on terrorism been won? But equally, you could say, in relation to the Catholic Church, is that Catholic fundamentalism of the last 3 decades starting to blow itself out? What do you think, Kevin?
Yes and no, because
In other words, do we have a pessimistic sense that fundamentalism is on the up and up and it's going to be the future, or is it ebbing and is something better coming in its place?
1.2 billion Catholics in the world, and I've travelled a lot, and you go to different countries and they'd operate out from, in our terms, a very fundamental Catholicism, and I don't say that in any denigrating sense. It's very, very real for them and very powerful. They're spiritual. In the West now, I think it's on declining. This is my view. Perhaps not at an official level always. It isn't. But more and more the people I'm meeting, they've gone beyond there. They're somewhere else. Even though they feel their Christian roots are for them, the increased education and also internet and lots of experiences they're having now, they've moved beyond the fundamentalist story. But I want to hesitate. Could I go back to my first point? In many countries I've been to, and I don't know the right term, I'll say less developed, but we'll take that like that if you don't mind for a moment. They should sound a bit superior or elitist. If you go to their churches and listen to their homilies or whatever, they're very basic, sort of fundamental, but very, very real for them. But in our education,
I think it's important to draw a distinction between Catholic fundamentalism and Protestant fundamentalism. Catholic fundamentalism is, of course, to the doctrines and so on. And when I read your book, I asked myself, I wonder how many Christians or Catholics still read the Genesis account as a historical fact. I think the majority probably would, simply because they haven't been told otherwise. But then Protestant fundamentalism is different. They've got this sort of feeling that the Bible is something given to them personally by God. You know, sometimes they talk about God's love letter to me, that type of thing. And, you know, if you look at it from their point of view...
Or even occasionally that the Bible is God.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But I read one manifesto, I think it was a Southern Baptist group of churches. They said, we believe in fundamentalism, that is, we take the common sense interpretation of the Bible. Now that's very reasonable, but it presumes that God wrote the Bible in English, preferably with an American diction.
What about if God wrote the Bible at all?
So that, it's a very different attitude to the Bible.
But are you, well, because we're going to talk about the Bible in the next section, but are you, do you feel positive or negative in terms of the future and fundamentalism? Do you think there's a lot more fundamentalism coming down the pipeline, or do you think it's blowing itself out?
I think it's probably blown itself out in the same way that many religious attitudes and assumptions are probably dying out. And as with the atheism, it's probably a good thing.
But haven't we had one very long pontificate which actually promoted Catholic fundamentalism and deterred dissidents in any form? I mean, they capillaried women who wanted to make choices pro-life. They condemned homosexuals as damned to hell. They were non-accepting of so many people. So it may be different with Pope Francis. We have somebody who's open to embracing all people, but until now the Church has been very much a club from which certain people would be excommunicated or at least not allowed to participate in the Eucharist. And that has been a grave source of worry for me for a long time.
Before you close this session, Stephen, we forgot, I forgot and you forgot, we're going to throw it open to questions from the floor.
Okay, let's do that now.
Can I start off with one while people think about it? It seems to me that one of the problems is that all of us, the whole 7 billion human beings, have a meta-narrative. Even atheists have some sort of set of assumptions and presumptions out of which they think about and act out their lives. And it seems to me one of part of the meta-narrative of Catholicism or Christianity in its pure form is that it's an invitation to humankind to enter into this mystery, into the numinous, into the divine. Gregory of Nyssa said so long ago, and I was reading Kevin's book and I quoted it on Catholica. It was in fact a whole lot of others said something very similar. Sorry, the goal of what is sentient life is to become like God. The crucial words there were to become like God. Now, none of us can actually become God, but the idea they were putting out, and it's in a section of Kevin's book, and I'll highlight it later on Catholica, but what's happened is the meta-narrative seems to have changed, and instead of taking us into the mystery, what the institution promotes today is taking the mystery out of the mystery and concretising it in dogma and things. You have to believe this and that and so on. I was wondering if the panellists would like to comment on what does the institution need to do if it is to become a force in civilisation again, in terms of that putting forward this idea that religion is taking us into the numinous, taking us towards God, rather than taking the mystery out.
Well, I think the whole point of religion is, of course, to take us into the numinous. The very word religion, from the Latin religio, means to reconnect with or bind back to. And what are we reconnecting with or binding back but to the sacred? So this is why I find in contemporary society at the moment people are making this distinction between spirituality and religion. And they're saying things like, I ask my students, for instance, at the university, what is spirituality? And they say, well, to me it's connectedness, connecting to the inner self, connecting to other people, connecting to nature. I said, well, it's funny that's what religion means. It's connectedness, binding back. And so what we've got at the moment is this funny kind of wordplay going on, where somehow in the modern mind, religion means the old-fashioned and wrong way of doing things, and spirituality means the new way of doing things. So I think that's one of the things that I've noticed, particularly in the young. Another thing I'd like to say about this is that I'm not so sure that fundamentalism is blowing itself out. I wouldn't be too confident. I'm glad that some of the people here feel that it is, but I tell you why I don't think it is. Because religion is now a very minor discourse in the educated West. Here in Australia, 10% of Catholics attend church on a regular basis, but overall, if you include, say, Protestants and all the faiths, world traditions, I think it's about 6 or 7% religious participation. The Catholic proportion of that is relatively higher. I think that a lot of young people are now growing up without any contact with religious life at all.
Well, why would they want contact, David, with a religious life that excludes them and doesn't connect them?
Precisely. But the point I'm trying to make, Peter, is that if they feel there's just this bland secular materialism, then in particularly their young minds, they're going to think that being a gung-ho fundamentalist is the only option. Now, I come across a lot of students, and teach them every other day, and that's the way they're thinking. You either become a very passionate evangelical, born-again Christian with all the problems and paraphernalia and right-wing ideologies associated with that, or you simply blandly fuse yourself with the status quo. Now, that's our fault.
So you're saying there's going to be a lot more...
I think
we know there's going to be a lot more bland.
A lot more.
We know there's a lot more bland, and that's going to drive more fundamentalism.
Right. And I think, look, I think if there's fundamentalism increasing, and it's becoming and already is a global catastrophe, it's our fault in the church for not having had conversations like this sooner. In other words, not presenting a more sophisticated, more nuanced, more complex,
more inclusive,
and more inclusive, of course, form of Christianity, as that's why fundamentalism is happening. It's a reaction. They can't see anything going on in our churches that attracts them.
I'm very conscious of the time. If there anyone with other questions, rather than getting multiple responses to that question, if anyone's got any other question to ask.
I just wanted to ask, thanks, just raise the issue, I suppose, that a lot of this fundamentalism, and I think our institutional church has been caught up in it, and that's the obsession with answers and the difficulty of dealing with questions and living with questions. And I think if you go back to the Gospels, you're looking at a Jesus who was saying to people, I'm convinced I have another way towards God, whatever you understand God to be, than what our religious leaders have given us up till now, and I'm inviting you to join. And the whole process started as a gift of invitation. And once you become obsessed with answers, then you need to force people to follow the same line and come up with the same answers and subscribe to those answers. And it creates that infantile inability to deal with question and deal with uncertainty.
Comments, anyone?
Yes, if I could make a brief one. I think one of the comments that Richard Dawkins keeps throwing out to us that is unanswered a lot by the churches with any conviction is, where do we stand with regard to our understanding of evolution? Has it moved beyond the biological into something psychosocial, cultural and spiritual, or are we still stuck back with Darwin? And whilst we still remain in a state of unresolution there, where we remain in a situation where that question contains no answer, young people will stay away. They really want to be able to adopt, I would think, an approach to spirituality or mystical experience which is at least compatible with science and which is able to answer the savage critique that Dawkins and Grayling and others have thrown out. And that's what the person in the audience was asking a little while ago about evolution. I mean, we may not talk about the evolution of God, but come to terms with the reality of evolution as it is today and the various transformations that are occurring that introduce purposiveness and finality to evolution is, I think, absolutely crucial, because without that there will be no church as we know it.
I like the comment just made then. I regard like faith as, groping towards the mystery, and it's a journey of insight and sharing and prayer and meditation and living, but not to have set answers, because as I understand God, whatever that means, it's beyond the words, but our experience leads us towards it. That's why I think in all this that we, not talking about this panel or anyone, that we don't become over-intellectualised, that the experience in prayer, meditation, our experience of working with the disadvantaged or experience in experiencing creation is fundamental, as well as the reading and searching and that. So one thing I think to overcome fundamentalism is also overcome fundamentalism, that's all he said, to give people profound and life-changing experiences in a good sense, and then the words make sense.
Thank you.
Breath of Creator, essence of star.